Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Joining us on today's show is Prairie Public's Director of Radio, Bill Thomas. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, easy to do.
Well, it is that. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background maybe as we get started.
Well, I'm a longtime radio guy. I grew up in southern Illinois, a town about the size of Minot on the Mississippi River. But I got involved in radio in college, and after college I was volunteering and then working as staff at different stations. These were non-commercial stations, and kind of worked my way up at different towns and stations in the public radio system, and eventually was intrigued by the idea that North Dakota was taking 3 different public radio operations that covered the state and combining them into one statewide network, and the task of taking that on was pretty interesting, and that got me here.
Yeah, officially you're the only director of radio for the statewide network that Prairie Public's ever had.
Yes, that's true. Prairie Public had a network in the western part of the state, and NDSU and UND had stations in the east, and they were all operated independently. And there was a time in the 90s when it seemed like an interesting idea to put them all together, and that's what they did, and then asked me to manage that process, and I've been doing it ever since.
Well, Bill, talk about what goes on a week-to-week basis.
Well, we have people producing shows here in our studios in Fargo and Bismarck, and of course we are providing access for our listeners to things that come from NPR in Washington or American Public Media or PRX, the different program suppliers that we work with nationally. We have 2 music hosts, one for our classical music stream, and that's Scott Prebys. Many people will recognize his name, and many people will also recognize the name of Mike Olson, who manages our roots rock and jazz music stream. And then we have a news department of 3 people, and of course they are every day out there covering the news. Dave Thompson is based in Bismarck, and he is the dean of the State House reporters out there. He's really got seniority and an incredible depth of knowledge about North Dakota state government, but he's also a really seasoned journalist and news person. And then Todd McDonald and Danielle Webster work on a whole variety of stories. Well, they all do, and they are on every day with our newscasts. And then we also have a public affairs or an interview and discussion show called Main Street, and that is on 5 days a week, and they are searching for people to talk to about things that are interesting to our Prairie Public audience, and a lot of that means local and regional things that aren't necessarily being covered elsewhere. Sometimes it's a national story too. If we think our audience would be interested in it, we'll go after it.
Yeah, but throughout the week and months, you have guest commentators come on also. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, there are people who are on, most of them on kind of a weekly basis. Matt O'Lean, who's on the staff here, does movie reviews. Tom Easern, who's a distinguished professor of history at NDSU, is a regular commentator with his thoughts and essays about a number of different things. We have Sue Balcom, who is, among other things, a person very interested in food, and she comes on and talks about food and the seasons and growing and cooking, and that's a lot of fun. Chuck Lura is a naturalist, talks about natural North Dakota and plants and animals and skies and rocks and all those kinds of things. Jack Weinstein is a philosophy professor at the University of North Dakota. He does a monthly hour-long interview show, but then also comes on Main Street and talks there. So it's really a range of things that are on a recurring basis, and then anything new or interesting that's coming up, from politics to culture to horticulture. Yeah, Ron Smith is a regular guest talking about gardening in particular, and houseplants a little sometimes, and or lawns and trees, and he's got such a wealth of experience, and is one of our guests that prompts people to call in and ask questions.
Yeah. With that said, let's talk about the growth you've seen in membership and listenership, I guess. kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, and when we look back, so I started here in 1999, and that's when the statewide network started. So that's sort of our start date for comparison and looking at things. And they've gone up and down and up and down, but it's definitely been a good upward trend when you look at it over a period of months and years. And we've seen that grow. Our listenership tends to kind of go up when there's really newsy things happening, because news is our biggest driver of our listenership, with Morning Edition and All Things Considered, and then drop back a little when the news is over, but the next time the news comes up, it goes up a little higher. And so our audience has gotten larger and larger as we've gone on, and our membership, the people who support us, because that's the most important support we have, is the member support, that has definitely been on a long upward trend. This year we've got the highest membership we've ever had, and we hope next year it'll be higher yet.
Well, but is radio still a viable tool, with the increase in
Yeah.
all kinds of technology out there?
Right, it seems kind of old-fashioned now, the radio, like what's going on there? And a couple of things I'll say about that. One is way more people still listen to over-the-air broadcast radio, AM, FM radio, than consume audio in other forms, so the internet and different recorded forms. So radio still has a really big audience, but clearly people are getting audio material, whether it's music or spoken word, interviews or discussions in other places, and that can be on-demand audio or streaming audio that comes through the internet, and that is growing for sure. And the total amount of time that people are spending with audio is growing. So it's not a zero-sum game, but definitely we've seen in radio time spent listening's gone down. But some people say radio isn't going away; it's going everywhere. The listening continues to be a really popular way to get music and get information, both. And the fact that people can get Dakota Datebook as a podcast, as well as over the air, right now it just means more people are getting Dakota Datebook.
Well, you say that, and you talk about these devices, and again, it's just a way to receive the information, but do you get to count those devices at all?
Well, we try to, and it's a challenge when we first started really having substantial amount of material go out over the internet. I thought, oh, this is great. We'll know where every listener is. We'll know who every listener is. And it doesn't quite work like that. People get things through social media. Tracking that is different than tracking downloads off our own website. Yeah, those we can keep track of, but then things go to aggregators and show up in other places. We have podcasts that are going out there, and we have to depend on some of the podcast providers to give us information about the podcasts that go out through them. Some go out through providers that give us detailed information, and some don't. We have, there's a great app called NPR One that provides you an almost live current stream of public radio programming that includes things from the Prairie Public Shop as well as the things that NPR produces. And that comes in, like the score from that comes in a different way on a different track. So it's really much more of a challenge than I thought to try to keep track of it, but we do try to count them. And another question is, our model for many years has been this one where our biggest source of support's been membership. Well, how does that work over the internet? That's still playing out, and it may play out, it may be like a different kind of formula and setup of how people can support us. People who get public radio programming do seem to want to support it. They are willing to support it, but the structure is going to be different.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned Morning Edition and All Things Considered, probably the two mainstay programs on
Right.
most public radio networks,
Yeah.
if they have NPR programming. For people that may not know, tell us what they're about.
Okay, well, they're both called magazine shows because, like an old paper magazine, they will, like the old Life magazine or Time magazine or something like that, they will have a variety of things on them. They always cover the news of the day, and they also cover arts and education. There are features on there about all kinds of things that just have to do with life, and people who listen like to know things. That's a big defining characteristic for the public radio audience. They like to know things in depth. They like to know the background. So we will take time as we're talking. There's news coming out of Latin America, and you will find public radio with reporters there, talking to people there, and trying to really find out why things are happening at a depth that you don't see from some other media. And these shows also have this characteristic that they are national local hybrids. So Morning Edition and All Things Considered, if you listen to the Prairie Public version of it, that's going to be really different from the version of it that you hear in Boston or San Francisco or Missoula, Montana, because the show is set up with very precise timing and places where we are supposed to come in and do our local part. So like we're going in and here we're talking about what's happening in our region, and then we go back to the national feed and they talk about things that are happening around the country and around the world. NPR has grown and grown. They have become just really highly respected and highly developed in terms of the number of journalists and the people they have there as a news gathering machine. But it's not just news. So this morning, if you were listening, you heard news about things going on around the world, political news, military news, but then you also heard some stuff about young people reciting poetry and a thing about a famous restaurant, and so it's got that variety that keeps you from getting totally bored, and it keeps you fascinated, and just really a great group of people presenting it.
Yeah, I know some of your listeners, sometimes when you make changes or changes are made by the national, it messes up their routine.
Yeah. For instance, one of the things we do is we run a program, and this is not on every station, but we run a program called Stardate. And it's in the morning at a certain time during Morning Edition. And Morning Edition made a change in their schedule, so we had to move Stardate a few minutes, just the way it worked, a different spot to come in. And we heard about it from people who, that's how I know when to get in the car, or that's how I know my kid's going to be late for school if we haven't left yet. And so, yeah, people depend on that. And it'll be interesting. We have had a change in the music for these shows. And the music, the music that helps you go from one part to another is an integral part of the show. And people are not always that conscious of it, but people notice when it changes. So we've had a change happen in the Morning Edition music in May, and people are reacting to that. And then we have changes going to be happening in the All Things Considered music, and that's really iconic music, so it'll be interesting to see how people feel about it.
Well, Bill, you kind of hit on this, but a little more specific. Why have these shows remained so relevant, and what seems to really set them apart from other news type shows?
Well, I think it's that a few things. One, a lot of care goes into just how they're produced. That they are produced with a pacing and a timing and a delivery and a music that helps it all go together really well. But that's kind of an underpinning. I think the biggest thing that has kept it going is that these shows have always been really interested in trying to give the listener the fullest possible picture of whatever they're talking about. So they're not there to push one side or another side of things, but to let you know and help you understand what's going on. Not that there's never stuff with point of view, and you have people with opinions in there sometimes, but people who listen to it of all political stripes, who listen to it say, I listen to it because I really feel like I'm getting the information. I'm getting the things I want to know about, and I'm getting them in a way where I'm getting the background, I'm getting the full picture. And so that kind of depth and fairness, I think, fairness in presenting things helps keep people coming back over and over to these shows.
Yeah, it kind of leads into the next question here. With Morning Edition, all things considered, even some of our local coverage, sometimes cover things that aren't covered as thoroughly maybe as other networks. But can you talk about that commitment and what it takes in staffing and time to deliver that kind of news?
Well, it always takes more staffing and time than you have, it seems, because there's always more stories that could be gone into better. We have a staff of 3 people working directly on the newscasts, our news programming, and then we also have 3 people working on Main Street, which is part of our information programming. And I don't know the size of the staff at National Public Radio right now at NPR, but they have a large news gathering staff, and they consider the news people at all the different stations around the country to be part of that NPR news gathering system. And if you add up the news people who work directly for NPR, both at their headquarters in DC, their studios in different places around the country, they have a big one in Culver City, but also in other cities, their bureaus around the world, and then you add in the people at all the stations, it is a really large newsroom. It's larger, if you consider it that way, it's the largest newsroom in the country. And that helps NPR. One of the things that is an issue for some of the other news organizations is that sometimes it's called that inside the Beltway look, or only New York, or only Los Angeles. And the fact that NPR has an association with us here and other people all around the country helps them have a wider vision. But yeah, it's expensive, and most of the budget of NPR nationally, which is over about 111 million, I think, goes to news and these news magazine production.
Yeah. Let's change the subject just a little bit and go to a local thing that you've been doing for a number of years, Dakota Datebook. People that have heard it know what it is, but tell me, what is Dakota Datebook?
Well, Dakota Datebook is a little bit of information about something that happened around here. And it starts with a meadowlark. One person was talking to one of our reporters and said, "You're that network where the little bird sings and then you tell me something." And we start with a meadowlark sound, and it has a story about a person or an event that happened, or just something of interest, not a news story. A lot of times they're from a long time ago. And we pick ones and encourage our writers to come up with these stories, and they're about 3 minutes long, to be something that just helps you kind of understand where we live better. And our listeners are people who like to know things, and they love knowing that, there were Guinness Book of World Records set in North Dakota. They love knowing about people who were here, who did really interesting or influential or just quirky and funny things, understanding more about the political history, the agricultural history, the indigenous people's history of this area, or just a really interesting baseball game that got played one day. And this, I was talking about it with somebody, And I compared listening to Dakota Datebook over a period of time. It's sort of like having a 3D printer that's coming in and giving you one little bit of information, then a different little bit of information, then another piece of information that helps you build up a really fuller picture of what our life is about and where it's come from and why it's like it is in this region. So yeah, people like it.
Yeah. And I know for years you've discussed having a book, and I understand now there will be one.
Yeah, thanks to a partnership with David Heslin, who's a professor at the University of North Dakota. He's got a publishing practicum, and he and his students have worked on putting together a book made up from Dakota Datebooks. And that has been a really interesting project. They picked 365 different datebook stories. We've got thousands of them now because we've been doing it for so long. And they went through them all and picked 365 that they thought were really good. They wanted to be sure there was one from each county in North Dakota. They tried to pick a variety of types of people who are talked about in them and events that happen. And it's being published as an ebook, so people can get it online for free. And then we are also working on bringing out a print edition so people can have the old-fashioned paper kind of book of it too. So yeah, that's really fun and exciting that we finally have that happening.
Well, we look forward to that. Yeah, can you tell me and talk a bit about the key differences between commercial radio and public radio?
Well, the base difference is how we fund ourselves, and then the other differences come out of that. Commercial radio is funded by selling commercials, by selling advertisements. And their job is to have listeners to listen to the advertisements. And because of the way the advertising world works, they shape their programming to draw a certain kind of listener that they think they can sell advertising for. And that's led to what you call a really segmented situation where one radio station may be devoted to trying to attract more young women, and another one might be devoted to getting middle-aged men, and they have different slices that they're focusing on, because then they are able to sell their advertising according to that. So they'll do programming that helps attract those audiences, and they also, of course, are as commercial for-profit businesses, and in the past several years have been driven a lot by cost-cutting pushes. So they try to make their programming as inexpensively as possible so they can return a profit to their shareholders, which is their job. Our job is different. We're a nonprofit organization. We have sponsorship from businesses, but it's just a small percent of our income, significant but small. We're supported primarily by contributions directly from the people who listen to us. That's the biggest percentage in our income budget. So that means we're paying attention to what interests them. And as a nonprofit, our job is not to return a profit to shareholders. Our job is to try to assemble the maximum resources we have and do the best programming that we can for the people who support us. And then we also get support from the state of North Dakota, and the legislature supports it because they think we are an important element of the state. It's an advantage to our state to have us here, to have people come and to have us available all over the state. They especially support getting the transmitters out in some of the lower population areas where it might not be feasible for us otherwise. And so that's great support as well. So we try to provide a public service then to because the way radio works, it's not like everybody in the world, but to the people who can listen to us, and we're open. We have a kind of a wider range of listenership than commercial radio stations have, with a greater age range and difference among the people.
Bill, we've only got about a minute left. I'm going to roll two questions in here. Tell me what digital radio is, and is it growing, and where do you see public radio, say, in 5 or 10 years?
Okay, digital radio is still kind of new, I guess. It's been around for a few years now. We broadcast in it, and if you have a digital receiver, what it means is you can get both of our streams of programming right on your radio. You don't have to go to the internet to get it. And it helps with some kinds of interference and gives you, as they used to say, CD quality. Remember CDs? So that's what that does. Radio in 5 years, I think regular broadcast radio is still going to be going strong. It's a really efficient way of getting information out there, but there is going to be so much more going on with digital distribution, podcasting, and custom digital streams, I think, are going to be a real significant element in what, I don't know if it'll still be called radio, but what we think of as radio.
Well, Bill, we're out of time. If people want more information, where can they go?
Well, they can certainly write me at Prairie Public, bthomas@prairiepublic.org. Go to our website, take a look there. There's a lot of information there, or our Facebook page.
Bill, thanks for joining us today. Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funding provided by the members of Prairie Public.